Welcome to CR Classics, our look at some of the best matches in tennis history. Today, New York Times writer, host of the No Challenges Remaining podcast, and returning guest here at Cracked Racquets, Ben Rothenberg, joins me to discuss one of the most impactful matches in recent tennis history. We take ourselves all the way back to 2005 to talk about the Australian Open semifinal between Serena Williams and Maria Sharapova. Now, those of you who remember the match can understand why we chose this one, but there are ups and downs, there are vacillations of play, there are momentum swings, there are blown opportunities, there are that and so much more. It's why we are so excited to talk about this match. Of course, it is always a pleasure when we get someone the quality of Ben Rothenberg on the podcast. But before we get to the show, I do have to remind all of you that these episodes are made possible by our friends at Midwest Sports. And look, for more than 20 years, Midwest Sports has served as one of the world's premier tennis equipment suppliers. They've got their 40,000 square foot tennis warehouse where they offer a comprehensive selection of fast shipping tennis supplies that few retailers can match. They have one of the largest in-stock inventories of tennis equipment online, tens of thousands of products. They've also got a staff that is intimately familiar with all of the tennis equipment and can help you find the perfect tennis racket, shoe, or clothing that will put your game ahead of the competition. How you can go support them, go to MidwestSports.com. You'll find your brand of clothing that you need, your racket, your strings, and you use our promo code CR15, you'll get 15% off your order. Better than that, if you order over $75, your shipping will come absolutely free, so you'll get a little bit of a deal, you'll get to save some money in your pocket, and you'll get to find all of the great tennis products out there, all at your disposal, all in one location. That's MidwestSports.com. Use the promo code CR15, get 15% off your order. With that being said, let's get to our CR Classic today, the 2005 Australian Open semifinal, Serena Williams versus Maria Sharapova, with our guest, Ben Rothenberg. Joining me for today's edition of CR Classics, you may know his work as a writer for the New York Times, as a podcast host of the No Challenges Remaining podcast. I affectionately know him as someone who is a repeat guest here on our Cracked Racquets platform. Ben Rothenberg. Ben, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I affectionately return. I am happy to be here. Yeah, it's been lovely to be here, and thank you for reaching out to me in this time of tennis separation and barrenness and loneliness. You are a light in the darkness.
You know, again, to sort of get into the match we are going to be talking about today on CR Classics, the 2005 Australian Open between Serena Williams and Maria Sharapova. And look, obviously, 2005, you can see my face on camera. I like to think I look fairly young. I look my age. And, you know, for me, I'm 10 years, or I think I'm 9 years old at the time, turning 10 that October. It's 15 years ago. What is 15 years ago Ben Rothenberg up to at this time period?
All right. In 2005, I was a senior in high school. I was in the class of 05 here in Washington, D.C., and I was probably watching a little more tennis during Australian Open, or following more tennis during the Australian Open than usual because NHL was locked out, my other big sport. I remember that about 05 in sports. And yeah, those were kind of the main things that are important. I was 17. This is the last match, my last Grand Slam as a minor. I turned 18 in February 2005.
You and Maria Sharapova both.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we're very similar ages, and she just quit the sport, so maybe I don't know what she's telling me. So, yeah. So, yeah, me and Maria were close in age, and that was always. I mean, we've talked about this before on your show, but like 87 being the best year for tennis, and you argue about whatever you're born 96, is it? 95. Sorry. And yeah, but 87, Sharapova, Djokovic, Murray, Rothenberg. I mean, it's really tough to beat, obviously.
So before we talk about the actual match, we have to set the scene for you all. Here's what was going on the WTA Tour in 2005. As you mentioned from the top, Ben, you go back to 2005 and just look at where the WTA was at in terms of generational shifts, in terms of who was moving to the top of the game, who was falling off, what generation was rising. This was a fascinating time period for the WTA.
Oh, absolutely. No, this was a sort of interesting transition period. It had been a little bit after what people talk about the sort of golden age of WTA, or, that's debated, but like turn of the millennium, WTA was like really considered pretty peak when you had the Williams sisters coming up, Capriati and Davenport top of their games, Hingis still a very relevant player, Anna Kournikova being like the most famous athlete in the world, almost male or female for good and bad reasons. This was a little bit after that. I think the dust had settled a bit. So from like 2000, 2001, 2002, that was the Williams domination period. Like Venus started it off, and then Serena took over, won 4 slams in a row between French Open 02 and Australian Open 03. So first Serena slam, she called it. And then the Belgians came. The Williams just got a little bit injured and lost a couple key matches to the Belgians. And the Belgians came. Kleisters got to number 1. Enning got to number 1. Enning won 3 slams. And then the Russians come in 04. And the Russian arrival is really led. I mean, Muskina got the first slam at the French Open, but Sharapova was the big star, the young one who was really considered a future number 1. And really, actually, she is the only one of them who got to number 1 of that generation of Russians. So Sharapova had beaten Serena in the 2004 Wimbledon final, which was considered a massive upset. And it really was. It was 2004 Wimbledon was one of the first tournaments that I was like home from school as a 17-year-old, like didn't have a job that summer, just like stayed and watched like every session of I guess it was ESPN's coverage of Wimbledon, and also NBC, I guess, had some of it back then too. And Sharapova winning, I think, had been a really seismic upset. It was the first like tennis result that really shocked me. I did not see that coming. Serena had been pretty inevitable, and she really got her doors blown off by Sharapova in this Wimbledon final. It was 1-4, and it didn't really feel that close at times either in the second set. So then those two kind of emerged as the two alphas, the two biggest stars on tour. They play at the year-end championships at the Staples Center in LA. It was held there back in 04. And Sharapova wins in 3 sets after Serena suffers an ab injury midway through that match in the final of the year-end championships. And so then she's 2-1 against Serena. She's won the last 2. She's like the it girl. She's like the new person. And people are talking more and more about how Serena is like fading, how Serena is, and the Williams is as a package. Because they had arrived at a package, they were often talked about as a package, how they were really receding from the sport. And there was a lot of I tweeted a bunch of clips from this match today, and people were like, wow, they're so dumb, these commentators, how could they know? But like, that's what they were living then. It's like, I mean, hindsight can be 20/20, but I think you do Serena particularly a lot of injustice if you make her sound like she was always inevitable. Like, she wasn't. Like, Serena had, especially in this phase of her career, it was pretty rocky. Her interest in the sport was going in and out. She had some issues with her fitness and conditioning that came later. Her sister had just been killed in a drive-by shooting in Compton, and that was very, understandably traumatic for her and for Venus. And things got rocky there for a stretch from 04 to 08, when Serena more or less got back to number 1 in 2008 when winning the US Open there. But this was in the middle of that, and this tournament, I think you just sense this like desperation from Serena, or this like real, like the stakes feel high for Serena here in a way they really haven't ever before or after. Like, I think that she saw Sharapova really pulling away from her, really taking control. If she'd beaten her 3 times in 3 big stages in a row, I think it would have been very tough for her to take. So
I have many things to say off of that. I do. Let's save the commentators for the match, because I think that's a huge piece of the equation. Listening to that, and first of all, reading some of the YouTube comments, the vitriol in them. I never go into a comment section of anything, is what I continue to learn. But you talked about Serena and her entering this match, and it's a vulnerable Serena Williams, which is fascinating to say, because at this point she's 23 years old, and hypothetically, you would think athletically she's at the peak of her powers. But as you mentioned, this is where she's about a season removed from, I think it was quadriceps surgery, and I know she had a similar tear in her stomach, and there were a couple of different things for her going wrong. And in that 2003-2004 season, she lost a lot of time there. She played 7 total tournaments in 03. She played 12 total tournaments in 04. She finished 04 outside of the top 6 for the first time since 1998. And in that 04 season, yes, she made that final at Wimbledon, as you mentioned, but it just wasn't a clean year for her. And so there was doubt completely, as you mentioned. And you look at Maria in 2004, and the obvious thing that sticks out is, yes, of course, she went on to win Wimbledon that year, and what that did for her career, what that did in terms of her trajectory. It got her on the path so immediately. But you look down the home stretch of 2004, at the U.S., or not the U.S. Open, post U.S. Open, she ends up winning in Korea. She ends up winning in Tokyo. I think she makes a final in Zurich. She loses in the semis of Philadelphia, and then, as you mentioned, she goes on to win the year-end finals. She beats Kuznetsova. She beats Serena. She beats Zvonareva, Miskina, and she finds herself inside the WTA top 10. At this point, coming into this tournament, she was number 4. You look at her Russian generation again, it's Miskina, Sharapova, Kuznetsova in the 3 through 5 positions, Dementieva number 6. And it's so fascinating to me because I'm asking for perspective. The 2004 Russian Fed Cup team, they go on to win. Maria Sharapova is not on that Fed Cup roster. She doesn't play any matches, at least in that sequence of events. Was that unexpected at that point?
Well, she didn't make the team. She wasn't one of the highest ranked players. I think she was open to playing. I think, if I remember, she didn't play the Olympics either in 04, which she had and that was a bit of a controversial because she was like the new golden girl of the sport. I think a lot of marketers, certainly, and promoters of the sport really wanted the Wimbledon champion in the Olympics. But I don't remember if the criteria were stricter, or she just wasn't even top 4 Russian at that point. Not 100% sure. She must have been top 4, I would think, but I'm not 100% sure. So if I remember correctly, she did not play 04 Olympics, and yeah, it was really a Russian takeover, and it was ovas everywhere in the sport, which people were joking about all the ovas and keeping track of all the different ovas there were. That was like a novelty thing. But Sharapova was there, and she was seen as really as a force. And she's a 17-year-old. You've been around obviously for all the rise of Coco Gauff, and Sharapova had some layer of that. She didn't have the feel-good story that Coco Gauff had. It wasn't really a feel-good story, but it was this like, wow, like this one's one to watch out for. She's pretty special, and she won a Grand Slam at 17 and had been known as a factor on tour since the time she was 11 or 12. She'd already been groomed by IMG and was getting agents and people who were sort of saw her in the pipeline for sure.
So now you know a little bit behind the Serena Williams and Maria Sharapovas of 2005. Next, we want to let you guys know how both of these players managed to reach the semifinals of this event. You look for Sharapova, a big win for her in her career, especially given some of the rivalry between this Russian generation. She knocks off Kuznetsova in 3 sets in the quarterfinals. Before that for Sharapova, it had been a fairly straightforward, dominant second and third set performances for her through in the second round, in the fourth round, in the matches she was pushed. But for her, she came into the semifinal in excellent form. And for Serena, you look at who she played to get to this point. She had knocked off the number 2 seed Emily Mauresmo 2-2, and that was a really good performance, especially against that Mauresmo. For Serena, she had dropped 1 set in the 4th round against Petrova, but other than that, had fairly. And you mentioned again, it's the generation Ova, another one in the mix there, and I think that might have actually been the 4th highest ranked Russian at the time of the Olympics. Just a random tidbit there, but yeah, for both these players, they came into the semifinals in good form.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Kuznetsova Sharapova was a big quarterfinal. That was the 2 most recent major winners, because Kuznetsova had won the 04 U.S. Open, so that was seen as a pretty blockbuster match, and that was tough. And this was really the match, even if it was number 4 versus number 7. And Serena was number 7. I believe I've heard them say at the broadcast that she was the betting favorite coming into this tournament, which I'm not. I surprised me a little bit, honestly, but I guess she was.
We've set the scene. We've talked about how they got there. Let's get right into the play. That gets us to the match, because you get at the start of this one, and it was all Maria Sharapova, and I was waiting to save my takes on her game at this point, because right off the bat, young Maria, pre any injury, she's at her healthiest, she's at her freshest. she is just such a phenomenal athlete, and for her size, 6'1", 6'2", for her to move and leverage her length and just how consistent she was, how good she was on the serve. This first set, she comes out hot, and Serena does not come out well, and that's the second half of the story. But on the first half, when you look at Maria Sharapova's performance through this first set, I mean, was this her level of play? Was this how she was through the start of 04? Because it is just exceptional.
No, she was really good. And this is the thing that I think people lose sight of. And this gets into a little bit of career retrospective and Meldonium conversations to come up later. This was a pre-Meld. No, but seriously, this was a pre-Meldonium match. And like early Sharapova, when the body was still holding together, she was so good. The serve was a real weapon. But back then, she was just blasting people off the court, and her weapons were really huge. And she was a very imposing, overwhelming player. And Serena had problems with her in their last match. I mean, she really did blow her off the court at Wimbledon. And I also like the early tidbit in this match. They were saying that Serena had requested tapes of Sharapova's earlier matches for scouting, which is not a very Williamsy thing to do. And I'm sure Serena didn't love that was reported, but it shows you how seriously Serena was taking the challenge of Sharapova. It was not a player who she really felt comfortable against, or she felt like she had figured out at this point.
Yeah, so I think we do have to get into the commentators now, because on that point, like, their fascination, and they called it videotapes, which is really just quintessential. That's just a great term. Mary Carrillo, Dick Enberg, Pam Shriver on the call in this match. Three of the best in the business. Rest in peace, of course, to Dick Enberg. And they're going to take slack in this podcast, at least from my end. That is not to indict them as commentators. I just want to make clear. Overall, huge fans of all three of them in general. But this match, it did not age well. And the reason I want to get into this now is because, yes, they were quite complimentary of Sharapova, but it was the exact opposite for Serena. I think Mary Carrillo, there's some exchange where she said, "I'm glad Serena's watching tape, but I wish she would watch tape on herself." And she outright calls Serena's forehand technique bad. She criticizes Venus's serve and forehand technique as bad. She criticizes the Williams parents for their stubbornness as coaches, and that's a little bit of paraphrasing, but that was the general consensus. And
it was a lot to handle. To your point, so to get to the commentator thing, you're saying you're surprised at how much they were kind of trashing Serena's forehand technique and stuff, but now you're just saying how bad Serena's forehand was. So you think they were right? Like, all the things they were saying? I mean, that's the thing, because, like, again, the hindsight, you have to sort of put yourself in this situation where you don't know that Serena turns out to be a GOAT, that she's really going to be that first of all, that Margaret Court will be just relevant to her life, but that she will be there getting 23 slams, because right now she has, I think, 6 at this point in this match, and so that's a nice number. It's a Hall of Fame lock number for sure, but she was not in a GOAT conversation, really.
She wasn't a one-namer yet. She was still Serena Williams, not just Serena.
Well, she was S. Williams on the scoreboard technically, but yeah, I think no, but I do think that there were real, it's one of those things with the Williamses. They had got a lot of skepticism early in their careers because they did not come through a traditional tennis pipeline. They were not really, even though they had worked with a lot of experienced coaches like Rick Macey and Balotelli a little bit, they were not traveling with them full time, certainly not citing them as being creators of their game. They were giving all the credit to their parents. And so when things did break down in their games, and it really was Venus more than Serena who had the more technical issues in her game, people would sort of say, like, they need more help, or this is like the coaches are not helping them out with these things that these, former tennis players and greats like Pam Shriver were saying were like glaring weaknesses in their games. So I think that was, kind of fair. Was it as bad as it made it out to be? Debatable, but at the same time, Serena was down a set and a break in this match, and Sharapova served for what would have been a pretty straightforward win in this match. Yeah. So this could have been a pretty lopsided loss for Serena before she turned it around. I'm
already excited we have you on because I'm glad you pushed me on that point. I would say you're right. There was an abundance of hyperbole. It wasn't that bad. I didn't see a fundamental technique flaw, which is sometimes I think what was the message that was accentuated, and I think that was a little unfair. Now, in this match in particular, Serena's body's all over the place. She's falling back on almost each and every forehand, and maybe the biggest adjustment she's made in her career is her tactical, her idea of stepping forward inside inside the baseline, playing balls early, taking time away from her opponents by keeping her momentum moving forward. That's obviously what's made her the aggressive player she is today. And she wasn't doing that in this match, but I don't know how much her bad play was a symptom of Serena's struggles or just a symptom of how well Maria Sharapova was playing. I mean, again, to get back to the movement, there's a point, it's 5-1, it's the love-all point in the first set, and it's a point Sharapova loses, but or I think it was 40-love, 30-love, 4-40-love, and she's on the run, and she's stretched, and it's maybe one of the first times she had done it where she goes to the left hand, and she plays the left-handed forehand on the run. And it's an exceptional point. And it's just one of those, the athleticism, the fact that she does have the firepower. She reminds me of what in my mind, I see Alex Zverev doing on the court when he's at his best. It's just the length, the leverage, the pop out of the corners. They can just move and hit the ball in different ways than I had seen. And I just think the reason we could afford to go on a tangent in set one is because, with all due respect, it just wasn't that high of a level of tennis because Sharapova dominated Serena. And that was the story coming out of set one, right? I guess your final thoughts on this set, because Serena, I don't think, got a break point. She got broken to go down 2-1 at the beginning of the set. She got immediately broken again for 4-1, or for 3-1 maybe. I think there was an opportunity for her almost to break back for 4-1. Sharapova dealt with it fairly quickly, and again, for her it was the down the lines, the cross courts, just making that extra ball. There were a couple of on the run passes as well. A dominant first set from Maria, right?
Yeah, I mean, just one quote that I wrote down that stuck out to me. Carrillo says that there's nothing shy about this kid in reference to Sharapova, and Enberg responds with, "There's no governor on her game," which is a baffling phrase. I have no idea what that means, but I really enjoyed it.
A dominant performance from Maria Sharapova earned her a 6-2 first set, and through that first set, the story really was the level of play that Maria displayed. Now, the reason we talk about this CR Classic, there's obviously going to be a momentum swing. We experienced that, and we saw Serena Williams, heart of a champion. Let's talk about that now in set number 2. Here's where things really begin to pick up, and it's right off the bat in set number 2 that Maria Sharapova earns herself an opportunity. I believe it's in the very first service game of the match of the set for Serena that she ends up getting to 30-40, and it's the patterns that keep emerging. It's, for Serena, there's second serves, and just she's not another forehand unforced error. And in fact, in this first game, it's a 15-30 point. There's a forehand error. Serena gets upset, and she spikes a ball into the crowd, and they show Mrs. Williams on the screen afterwards, and she's just shaking her head in disgust. And you can see for Serena that, she's starting to slip, she's starting to crack, and for her in this moment, she ended up coming up, on the 30-40 point. It's a long rally. Sharapova has the backhand she's looking for, and it's a down the line look, and she just misses it long, or maybe it was wide, as you mentioned. The pixelation, not great, definitely out though, and it goes back to deuce. And what I think the theme of this match, because yes, she blows break points in the third, or match points in the third set, but more than anything, she had about 3 or 4 chances in this second set where she could have put her foot on Serena's throat. And I know that's not the most glorious of metaphors, but yeah, she had her opportunities, and they just sort of slipped away from her.
No, completely. There were a couple moments, where I kept waiting, and Sharapova did get up a break late in the second set, serve 4 the match at 5-4. But there were a few times where she let Serena off the hook a little bit, and Serena maybe upped her level sometimes, but there were a few chances that Sharapova was just not as ruthless as maybe she could have been at times this match, and the focus wasn't totally there, and the overall quality of this match is not always the highest. I mean, this is not a sparkle. This is a match that I remember so fondly, not because of how amazing the tennis was, which is maybe what people remember another all-time great women's match from this same year, which is the Venus Davenport 05 Wimbledon final. That was just really, really good tennis in that match, and a close match. This one was all about the intensity of this match, and sort of the stakes and the gutturalness and the rivalry and the vying for the crown of being the biggest superstar in tennis, and what it meant for the rivalry later on. The actual tennis here is pretty scratchy at sometimes, and Serena is her serve particularly goes really in and out, literally in and out, but also just her sometimes just the speed on her serve. Sometimes she really seems to arm it in, just because they talk about her going 3/4 speed on her serve sometimes, and yeah, she just the point-to-point intensity is not always, or focus is not always there from Serena. It's just there's a lot of match management going on, let's say charitably.
Yeah, and after 1-1, Pam Shriver says, I think Maria is in Serena's head. And it's a fascinating quote, certainly.
Pam?
Well, Dick, there is an anger brewing with Serena Williams during the last about half hour. She's looked up at her player box and given a tongue lashing in that direction. She smacked a ball over that way. When she crossed the net after the first game of the second set, she was livid at herself. I just feel Sharapova is totally into the head of Serena Williams like no competitor has been into her head. She does not know how to handle the Russian right now mentally.
And again, given what we know, at that point, I think it was a 2-1 Sharapova lead in their career head-to-head, and what we know going forward is jokes on them for that comment. But it really did feel like in the moment that Sharapova had her.
Look, I don't. It's what this is. We talk about the commentators here, but my instinct is to defend them here because until Serena saves those match points and wins this match, Sharapova was in her head. It really was this match, and then 2007 was a whole different issue, which we can hopefully do as an epilogue when we finish. But they were not wrong. Serena was tense in this match. She looked fraught in this match. She understood. She was the one requesting VHS cassettes of Sharapova matches. She was up against it in this match, and I think the commentators were maybe getting a little bit carried away with how different directions they were going in. But for most of this match, it looks like Maria's going to win it, and they're talking to that narrative.
Yeah, and to get back to the opportunities, I think there's at the 1-1 game, 30-all, Sharapova misses a second serve return into the net. It hits the tape for 40-30. There's a wide serve and, a nice overhead from Serena to hold there. At 2-all, 30-all, again, another second serve that Sharapova has a clean look at. She misses the return in the top of the net. There's another second serve that she misses in the net tape when it's the deuce point for Serena that Serena ends up holding after with a serve +1 for 3-2. And then in that 2-3 game in the second set is when I think Serena starts to show her first signs of life. There's a double fault for love 15, then 3 sloppy Serena errors. But there's this 15-ball rally that ends up going the way of Serena. And I do think it's in this middle of the second set that you start to see her say, I need to just do something different. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, and she's talking to herself frequently. You can kind of hear clips of that. The audio from on-court wasn't as good back then, but you can still hear her monologuing a bit and just being frustrated and trying to figure things out and not giving up in this match, and not as much as the score was really kind of one direction towards Sharapova for most of this first 2 sets. Serena's dug in there, and she's still fighting, and you see the tenacity, and you really see it at the end of the match, but you do see signs of the sort of more quiet, simmering focus.
I think something that may have woken her up, and this gets back to the call situation from the U.S. Open quarterfinals the year before. It's 3-all. I think it's the deuce, or maybe it's the 30-40 point, and there's an inside-out forehand from Sharapova, and it ends up getting called in, and Serena is not happy about the call at all, and she goes on to hold that game, but you can see that it got her a little bit ticked off, and it got her a little bit frustrated, and I do think that, in that next game, she had chances against Sharapova on serve there, and unfortunately I do think it started to get in her head, and then all of a sudden Sharapova just breaks, and it's 5-4, and she's serving for the match, and then things just get weird, right, Ben?
Well, it was an incredible passing shot for Sharapova to break. She hits this great backhand cross court that leaves Serena sort of splayed on the ground to break for 5-4. Yeah, and then Sharapova, I think, plays a pretty tight service game there. Again, this is another one of those moments, the first real finish line possibility moment where Sharapova doesn't really totally put the hammer down here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. It was more of a choke than anything else. I mean, she didn't get to choke is a bold word. It was more of a tentative, tight game than anything else, and there were a couple of unforced errors, I believe. You look at, the pattern there.
When you haven't gotten broken all match and you get broken for the first time when you're serving for the match, and your opponent doesn't play lights out, that's completely on you. That's just mental. And obviously it's tough closing out Serena Williams in a Grand Slam. I'm not saying it's not, but that was a mental lapse for sure.
She had faced 3 break points up to that point, and then she goes backhand unforced error for love 15. A really nice Serena second serve return for love 30, but then a backhand unforced error after a 7-ball rally for 15-40. Double fault for 5-all. And then Serena just kind of runs away with the rest of the set. Sharapova doesn't get to game point on her service game at 5-6. It was, a net cord backhand from Serena that sort of threw Sharapova off for 30-40. And then second serve and inside-out forehand unforced error from Sharapova. All of a sudden, it's 7-5. Highway robbery for Serena to take this match to a third set, right?
No, again, because this match had not felt close. Really had felt like Sharapova was in control, was the better player, and Serena was hanging on. And Serena hung tough and got a look at 5-4, got her opponent blinked, and she pounced on that. She took advantage, and suddenly we're in a third set. And they don't show the video, but there's a decently long bathroom heat break. It was a hot day, also, to say, in Australia. It's not something that's debated. Or some people were saying it's hot. The commentators saying it wasn't that hot, but they're indoors, so what do they know? But I think it was. No, but seriously, also this is before your time, but that green surface they used to have. Well, it was also made, if I remember correctly, of cycled car tires or something. This rebound days, and so it got really hot and sticky and radiated a lot of heat. Players hated that surface. It's also really ugly color green. So good riddance to the green, acridly green courts of the Australian Open.
Yeah,
which died. I think 2007 was their last year.
You really could consider Serena Williams' second set win in this match over Sharapova highway robbery, but nevertheless, she escapes with a 7-5 second set. She breaks Sharapova at 5-4. Sharapova serving for the match, and like all great champions, Serena Williams extends this match to the third, showing Maria that she's not going anywhere now. It is a back and forth third set affair that once again sees momentum swing, sees big opportunities go by the wayside. Ben and I break all of that down right now. Right off the bat, you want to talk about the mindset for both of these players. They exchange breaks right away. Serena gets broken after just a sloppy game. I think it was 3 unforced errors from her. And, I think at the end, Sharapova hits a nice cross-court backhand on the run passing shot for 1-0. But then Maria just plays such a sloppy game back on the love 30 point. She tried to serve and volley, and that went nowhere, and it went to love 40. And all of a sudden, they're back at 1-1. And again, at this point, you sort of start to see how tentative Maria Sharapova gets as this match go along. And, I've complimented them so many times, but tennisabstract.com has the best match reviews and the best, breakdown of the stats from so many matches. And you start to look at the stats from this one. In total, Maria Sharapova, 22 winners against 53 unforced errors. This is Alex Gruskin math, but if I had to get, and as you learned, Ben, I was really good at math in 2005, so that logic applies here. I would say probably 30 plus of those unforced errors come starting, 3-all in that second set onwards. And it really was more, it's a credit to Serena that she continued to fight, that she continued to find chances. But Maria's level takes a considerable dip, in my opinion, in this third.
No, it's one of those things that also shows you it's an interesting sort of competitive moment because they dip together. From this point on in the match, their intensity and their quality stays pretty close to each other the whole rest of the way. And there are a couple, obviously there's a few breaks down the road into them save match points and stuff, but they're kind of synced up here. And when one starts playing worse, the other matches up at playing worse, it brings her down to her level. And then when one picks it up, the other one picks it up, and they really, it's kind of a slog for the first 6-7 games of this third set. And then Sharapova gets up a break, and things get real intense real fast, and then the quality picks up very fast.
You mentioned this. It's not exactly the prettiest match to watch, and there were 225 points total played. If I had to ask you, Ben, how many rallies, what percentage of the match exceeded 6 shots, what do you think the answer is?
Out of 225, how many points exceeded 6 shots?
You don't have to give me a point. You can give me a percentage, too.
Oh, I'd say 5.
Yeah, so honestly, I was surprised here. 17% of the points went over 6 rallies, but, they had to have just been 7 shots because these were choppy points. The majority of them was either, Yeah, it was serve +1. It was an unforced error. It was a quick pass or a big down the line from these players. They were decisive. And to Serena's credit, and this is something I think Mary and Pam hit spot on in their play-by-play call. Serena was at her best even when she was missing, when she was on top of the baseline, when she was taking balls early, being aggressive in the biggest moments. And you talk about why this is such a pivotal match in tennis's history. She turns to an aggressive stance when she's down, when her back is against the wall, and it works. And the sort of confidence you gain from that, I can only imagine.
No, absolutely. No. So this is one of the Serena myth-making matches. Like we talk about, Serena was not this invincible force that people associate her being 10 years after this. Without this match, like this is one of those matches where she really pulls herself off the carpet, beats a player who was playing better than her, who was, ranked ahead of her, who was getting more attention than her, who was better thought of, by experts at this point than her. And it changes both their careers a lot. Like this is a match that Serena can draw from forever. And she had a couple before this. I mean, the main one that sticks out is 2003 Australian Open. She played Clijsters, and they mentioned this in the commentary, but she played Clijsters and was down 5-1 in the third set in the semifinals and reeled off 6 straight games to win that. Although Clijsters is a much less proven commodity, hadn't won a Grand Slam yet back then. Although the crowd was so for Clijsters in that match. It was a very hostile crowd that Serena, or very partisan crowd, I should say, that Serena had to face down in the match because Clijsters was, I think, engaged to Leighton Hewitt back then. So she was at peak Aussie Kim, and she was like an honorary Aussie. It was a weird time. But yeah, Serena, was known for being a fighter, but also was more recently known for these losses and for taking weird losses to Capriati and losing tight matches and getting blown out by Sharapova. So like this is really Serena becomes Serena, as she refers to herself in third person, with matches like this.
Yeah, and you go to the 3-all game here where Maria Sharapova gets her break. And, just to set the scene for how we got to match points, how Maria Sharapova had her opportunities. In terms of 3-all, 2 big serves from Serena to get to 30-love. And she looks in control of the game. It looks like we're going to stay on serve. But then Sharapova really does step up her level. It's the Sharapova we saw from the first set. She hits a huge inside-in backhand return to draw an error. It's 15th, or I think it was, then for 30-15. Then it's another forehand error for Serena, 30-all. There's a 16-shot rally after that ends with a Sharapova net core just like trickles over the net for a winner for 30-40. And then she punishes a second serve return, and just like that, she's up a break 4-3 serving. She hits this ridiculous lob at 4-3 30-love, and I believe ends up holding at love 4-5-3. And in that moment, you think to yourself, okay, now Sharapova's asserted herself. There was a little bit of dip. She got a little bit nervous, but here's where she once again shows how great of a champion she's about to become. And then that 5-4 game just gets weird. And again, there are 3 match points for Sharapova serving for this. I think it was the 40-30. She had the first 3 game points of the game. It was 40-30. It was the add-in after deuce 1, the add-in after deuce 2, or add-out, or whatever it was. Add-in. And I don't know. For me, I had only one blown opportunity. I said on the 40-30 point, Sharapova overcranked a cross-court forehand, and that got her to deuce. And I thought that was one where she could play that back. She maybe takes a little bit off that. But that's how she got to that point. And I just think this is, again, where Serena stepped up. And I don't know if there was, there was that inside-in or inside-out forehand winner she hits during a 10-ball rally to get to deuce, and that eventually gets her to the game point, and then she wins the game. That was on the 3rd match point. I thought Serena stepped up her level. I don't necessarily think, as opposed to that horrible service game 5-4 in the second set, this game was more a testament to Serena raising her level.
No, completely. And the kind of shots that she was hitting to save the second and third match points, those inside-out forehands, were not like very typical sort of Serena shots. It's like coming in behind the ball, taking time away, doing things she hadn't been doing in the match, and changing up her patterns. Like that was really where like Serena clearly clicks into some sort of God mode and just like knows what to do, and everything becomes clear. And that's the champion league moment. One of the big moments for her career that I always come back to is that game for Serena. And and even the first match point, Serena played pretty good. It was a good first serve that Sharapova landed in that 40-30 point, and Serena fended it off and kept extending a little bit, and Sharapova kept going for it and eventually missed the forehand a bit long. And I don't think Sharapova played this game badly. She got herself 3 match points. She hit big first serves into the deuce court to keep setting up more and more chances. And yeah, even after this, she doesn't, not like she goes away like she did a little bit in the second set. She holds her next service game to get to 6-all, skipping ahead a little bit. But so she's not out of it. She doesn't totally collapse here the way that she might have, and the way that a lot of other players have against Serena. She still stays in it, and Serena is at this point here, and you start seeing the commentators go back to them. Their tune changes very quickly on with the kind of Serena. Now they're suddenly all over Serena now, and Serena's best as she ever was, and vintage Serena isn't great to see her back like this. And that's not, that is obviously a bit fair weathering by them. They're kind of going with the front runner at any given time, but what was happening? I mean, Serena really, really asserted herself and arrived to this match at 5-4 in the third in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. And look, you talked about it. Sharapova still had chances after she got broken back for 6-all. In that 6-all game she had with Serena serving, she had, I believe, 3 different break points. She had her chances, and you look at what happened on all of them. It was, again, Serena coming up with the big shots. You look at what she was able to do on the 30-40 point. It's a wide serve, cross-court forehand, overhead winner, deuce. Then it's a wide serve, inside-in forehand, winner for deuce. Then there's this 11-shot rally that ends in a Sharapova forehand down the line, unforced error. And again, that's one of those things where she had a chance. That's probably the one she kicks herself over. But then it's a serve, volley, cross-court, drop volley combo, serve plus a forehand that draws an error. It's 7-6 Serena. And then we get to the 7-6 game. And from there, that one hurt. That one was where it was just like, I don't know exactly what happened there. I don't think it was, anything in particular Sharapova did wrong, but for me, the most memorable moment of this match, the most rewatchable moment of this match, if I can say, was 100% the 15-30 point. Serena tracks down a couple of big forehands from Maria. She gets Maria to hit a drop backhand volley, which she was anticipating the entire time. She passes him down the line, and then there's the squat cheer that I think has become so synonymous with Serena's success. That's the moment to me. What was your most memorable moment, and what, down the home stretch?
That is the iconic moment that gets sort of shown in clips of this match. Then obviously she wins the match point. She's leaping up in the air and she's very happy. And Oracene, her mother, who's usually very stoic, has this big reaction to this win too. She could tell how much this meant to her daughter to beat Sharapova, who had been this big, disruptive force in the Williams claim to the throne of the sport. So so that was, those two things together were pretty big for sure. And you just see and Serena kind of gaining her confidence when she gets ahead in the score for the first time, it's 1-love in the first set. She does finish it off relatively well.
What a performance from Serena Williams. It wasn't always the cleanest tennis, but nevertheless, she showed off her heart of a champion, advancing to the finals of the Australian Open with a 2-6, 7-5, 8-6 victory over Maria Sharapova. We've talked about so many aspects of the match, but one last thing we have to do. Ben and I give our final takeaways, and we talk about the legacy of this 2005 Australian Open semifinal. Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess, in terms of this is the home stretch of the match, Serena wins it. And it's, it's not a final. It's a semifinal. And for her, she has to come back and she plays a 3-set match against Capriati. But you look at, again, how this match concluded Davenport, excuse me. And you look at how this match concluded and just what it meant to Serena. What are your final takeaways from this one in particular and what it meant to Serena as well?
I think great match because of the intensity. I honestly I will take competitive intensity and fireworks and drama, if you want to call it that, and high stakes over clean hitting and but cold and detached. For me, this match was very fiery and very important and very heated and very high stakes. And then it was kind of scratchy and they didn't always hit the ball in the court. That's okay. I can forgive that.
No, there's I don't remember when it happens, but Sharapova she holds, or it was on a game point, she hits a winner, and there's this look in her eyes, and it just has this look of, I've got this match, and I am so determined to win this match, and you don't see that fire day in, day out, so just from your ordinary match, so I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't know if it's something you see in tennis much now, because I don't know, it's kind of an interesting time where these were, again, two young superstars, both going for something at the same time, and neither tour is giving exactly that right now. And so it's an interesting moment to see, and I think we'll get there soon. And I think we have, well, especially WTA, like you mentioned, with possible new generation coming up with Andreescu and Osaka and Barty, if you want to throw her in there, and Kenin. Yeah, if those kind of players can constellate together as stars and create something pretty, that'd be nice.
The problem is they all like each other too much. I need some hatred. I need a reason for them to dislike each other. I think that adds to it.
You do need, like, I do think a little bit of beef goes a long way in a stew, but I think that, if they become actual rivals, if they see themselves as standing in each other's way consistently, then that'll happen organically. It'll get more attention. But right now, like, there's so many years we had with 8 different players in Grand Slam finals. And so that happened, 2 years in a row. So there's not women's tennis I'm talking about, there's no consistent development of rivalries. And even like, Big Four, like even if they all are like doing like, Insta lives with each other, like those matches still feel heated because there are heated in their own way, because there are still stakes and they are still playing for something and they understand the context. Where at least for me, I don't feel, maybe you disagree, but like a Djokovic team final doesn't quite have that yet. It doesn't have that set. It's just different. It's different. Stakes feel different.
Last one for you. Was this the peak performance for either of these players? I could argue that first set from Maria is as well as she has ever played. And I'm not saying she didn't continue to play well, but, outside of that first set, I don't think this was a peak performance for either player. Maybe competitively, but not tennis-wise.
Well, I'm not sure when you started watching women's tennis more, but like I do think that Maria's best tennis was all happened in the first sort of 5 years of her career. And I think her best, most dominant slam was the 2008 Australian Open, when she finally won this tournament, and she was just dominating people. That was a really, really impressive tournament run that she had. Some really impressive score lines against players. She beat
4-0 over Enin, 3-1 over Jankovic, 5-3 Ivanovic.
And Henin had some like 30-something match winning streak, and then she got bageled by Sharapova. Like it was that kind of like. And Dementieva, she dominated too. She beat Davenport in the second round of that tournament.
2-0 over Dementieva, 1-3 over Davenport. That's ridiculous.
It was crazy. So like that was like all that's to say with Maria, like she was better before the shoulder, and she was a different player, and she was kind of, a lot of it was a shadow of herself after the shoulder injury, which she would say herself, but her like willpower then became her biggest weapon, and that she was eventually able 4 years. There was a 4-year gap between slams between the 2008 Aussie and the 2012 French, but that she was able to get herself there eventually is a big testament to her. But I mentioned the Meldonium earlier, so I'm going to bring it up again. Like she was a better player, like pre-Meldonium, like in a lot of ways. Like she was a more physical player, and she says that I think she started taking it in late 06, I believe was her story, after the US Open in 06 or maybe 05. I forget exactly which one it was, but like she was amazing before. Whether or not you think it helped her later on, you can debate that, but like she was an amazing physical athlete before that.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. And obviously for her, even through her first 5 seasons, there's a case for a Hall of Fame career just in those first 5 seasons of how good she was, how she came on the storm. It's at one point I think Mary Carrillo compares her to Monica Seles, and that's always going to be the teenage comparison because Monica Seles is the most accomplished teenager in, you could argue, men's or women's tennis history. But it's true. All of it's true. She was that impressive physically. She had all of the tools except for maybe volleying in her game, in her skill set. And it speaks to the impact of this match that unfortunately for her, there were, the different injuries, different nicks and bruises, and the serve starts to go away. But in this moment, everything is working. So it was a really fun match to watch.
Yeah, I also just think that, like, and I was talking about this a little bit with Gil also, but, like, compare this to like Federer and Nadal 08, which is another like big sort of match of the century candidate. And people do talk about this as being like one of the women's match of the century, even though quality obviously is not where they're talking about there, but just the sort of the stakes and the emotion and how pivotal it was. Like this match arguably was an inflection point in a way that I can't point to almost any match of like the Big Four being like a real inflection point, because they were around for so long that they almost always had time to course correct. Like, like Nadal beats Federer 08 Wimbledon. Everyone thinks it's torch passing. He finally wins on grass. But like Federer's fine. Federer's still going, and Federer's still doing things. Like Sharapova was never I think in some ways never totally the same after this loss.
And
even though she was still a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and again, just because I have to argue, Djokovic, 2010 U.S. Open, he fights off match points versus Fed. He does it again the next year. That sequence felt like a little bit of a turning point, but certainly you can't point to one match because Federer has still beaten him in the years that have since passed. For Serena, I really do think the only comparison you can make to her is someone like either LeBron, Michael Jordan, Muhammad Ali. That's the quality of athlete she is. And it's the multiple peaks, right? There's young Serena who does the Serena Slam from, she makes that final at the 01 U.S. Open, but then from there through the 03 Wimbledon, she's just dominant. She then sneaks this title in before, a couple of injuries. And then it's the 2007 version of Serena who wins 5 titles through 2010. Then you get 2012 to 2015 Serena, where it's just like the fact that might be her, her best 5-year stretch that late into her career. It speaks, and through 2016 as well, speaks to just there's these different primes, there's these different versions of Serena. At first, it was just this physical specimen. Then it's in this match, the person who can overcome these adversity and can think her way through these different matches. Then it's just a kind of confluence of both of them through that later stretch where she's just at the top of the game and mentally has an edge over everyone else. And the roots of that can all be traced to this match. You're absolutely right. This is one of those inflection points. I'm glad that, I'm going to steal that term for Serena Williams. That's a Michigan term for sure. I'm sure that's an angel hauler. But, I feel like that's why, this has to be a match considered. That's why I was so excited when you recommended it. I was like, final thoughts for you in terms of.
Yeah, I'm curious more what you got out of this, because you were not someone who was watching this match live. You were saying, like, what was it like for you looking back at this, and did it change the way you think about either of these women?
So that's a very good question. Again, you should host a podcast. But I did a pod today. I'm not going to say who the guest was, but he kept saying, that's a really good question. I wanted to be like, I know that's a good question. That's why I asked it. But I was like, but don't be rude to your guest. So I apologize for doing that to you. But
it's the first time you've complimented anything, so it's
well, I liked your shirt. I like your shirt. I like your hair. I like your mustache. I like all of it. I'm a fan of you, Ben. I called you literally the most sought-after person in tennis podcast right now. If that's, I know, but I'm also sensitive. I don't know if you know that. That's a quality about me. But I suppose that's an issue for another time. Going back to answer your question, going back and watching this, my concept is, because she did the Serena Slam in 2002 at the beginning of 2003, and I know there were a lot of injuries between then and 08-09, which is really when I started to watch, and at that point, outside of injuries, when Serena Williams was playing, she was winning slams each and every season, and to see this version of Serena, a 23-year-old Serena, who, yes, was coming off of surgery, but she just appeared vulnerable. There wasn't, especially on the forehand side, I have never seen her serve and her forehand. That sort of inconsistency, that's not the way she's ever played in my lifetime. And to see that form of her, it was different. And I really did think to myself, because I tried to come in somewhat blind, and I was like, I don't remember, does Sharapova win this match? And through the first set, I was like, does Sharapova win this match? I was like, I'm pretty sure Serena wins this match. And I started to doubt myself. And what really made me upset, even more than the Serena part, because I can see where Serena's improvements came from, but was just how good Sharapova was. And I think that's something I did. I knew she was really good when she was young. Not that she's not still young, but when she was freshest in the game. And to see her move like that, to see the sort of athlete she was, why she has become a cultural icon, because she's not Serena, but she, a career achievement wise, but she has that sort of celebrity, she has that sort of cultural status, and now I understand why, because I could totally see, if I was 17, 18, I would have just been all Maria Sharapova all the time.
When you mentioned the vulnerability, and we didn't talk about, I talked a little bit what Sharapova's next year was like, but Serena's was way worse. I mean, Serena, so she wins this tournament, wins the 05 Australian Open, and then kind of goes into a bit of a spin. She loses at Wimbledon. Her conditioning starts going. I think she starts having motivation issues. Obviously, her sister had been killed a couple years earlier, and I think that was sort of lingering with her, and other things were going on, and getting distracted by wanting to be an actress and things like that. It was really a legitimate conversation around Serena at that point, as silly as it seems in retrospect. And she loses at Wimbledon that year to Jill Krabis, which is a terrible loss in her career. And shout out to Jill, who's wonderful and lovely, but it was a bad loss for Serena. And then she comes to '06 Australia to defend this title, and she's like really out of shape. She like really struggles through 2 matches, plays this kind of unknown Chinese player named Li Na in the first round, I think, and doesn't do very well against her, and it's kind of sloppy, then loses like badly in the 3rd round, I want to say, to Hantukova. And it was just like she was just bad for all of '06 and sort of still out of shape, and I think she started skipping a few slams because she didn't want to be embarrassed out there anymore. All this is to say, like, these are things that get glossed over in the Serena is a queen, was a queen, always been a queen kind of conversations that happen now, and the sort of tone around her. And I'm glad that you got to see a little bit, even though she wins this match, obviously, and it is a foundational thing, but a peak of that kind of vulnerability that was a lot more apparent. There are some clips of Serena, like circa late '05 and in '06 when she loses. She loses somebody. I want to say it's like Tian Sun or somebody. She loses somebody in Beijing, and it's a horrible match. Like, she's so bad, and like you've never seen Serena as bad as she was at some of these stretches. And all this to say, I think that's something. I mentioned Michael Jordan, that they're doing this Last Dance documentary now, and I do hope that like they do pay time to dwell on like that it was not always like, obviously with the Bulls he was usually great, but like I hope they do have an episode on the Wizards, when he wasn't always when he wasn't always great, because that is still a part of his life. You shouldn't gloss over those things, because that's not how time works. This was just as real a tournament for her, the '05 Australian Open, as the '06 Australian Open was. They both were equally one slam in her career, even though she only won one. But they both still matter. They both should be taken into account. And so I'm glad to have shown you a little bit of my formative years in tennis here.
I also appreciate that. I also, and again, this is a larger conversation, but it gets to the social, political, economic impact of Serena Williams' career on the larger game of tennis, and just the way she was discussed and the way the coverage surrounded her and her sister, and the fact that she, as you mentioned, comes from this unorthodox unorthodox childhood where her parents trained her and they took her around the country, her and her sister, and they're doing all of these different things. And, it's almost secondhand information for me. It's like, yes, I'm well aware of what the history is. You want to talk about her parents. You want to talk about growing up with Venus. Superficially, I sort of understand what you're talking about. And, of course, Venus's fight for pay equity at the slams, significantly relevant, and it comes a little bit after this. But I didn't understand the doubt. I didn't understand the process of Serena becoming a champion. This is her, again, to get to the basketball comparisons, her losing to the bad boys or her doing whatever. This is her little blip before things really start to take off. And it puts Serena Williams in a completely different light, especially because she's 23 years old. And again, it's a prisoner of the moment thing where, as you mentioned, this was a really good point, that what was in front of them for Mary Carrillo, for Pam Shriver, for Dick Edinburgh, they were just saying what they were seeing. And that's completely fair. But it's 15 years later, and not only is she still playing, but Venus is still playing as well. So it's kind of like, to you. You know what I'm saying?
No, she did prove him wrong, and she did sort of, I don't know how much she was listening to the haters. Obviously, you see that clip of her responding to Bud Collins' impression, what she was a little more animated, or clearly that got to her, that question, and she went a longer, fuller answer and started volunteering more things as very fair defenses of herself. I want to say gay defense because that sounds like it's unjustified, but it was justified probably here. So both things are true. I think both they can both be accurate, what they were saying, or both be informed takes. If they were a little bit hot takey or a little bit more hyperbolic than they could have been, that's fair, but they weren't baseless. Like, I think it's just a cherry pick, and I was tweeting out some clips from this match in preparation for this to build up the hype for this pod for you.
Well done.
Being your hype man. I do think that, like, some people were like, look at you, like, being an idiot at PH Shriver, and like, that's not fair. Like, she was like, this is I was like, look, this is a quote from the second set of that match. That's what was happening. Serena was losing to Sharapova pretty decisively. That was the truth then. And then Serena is the one who herself, it wasn't incorrect until Serena changed the answers later. That hadn't happened until like an hour into the future. And so much of it now is going to be like, Serena was always great, is great, was always the best, and how dare you ever doubt her. But she wasn't always the best. She had to earn that and had to prove that, and this is one of those moments where that happened.
So that'll do it for this edition of CR Classics. Again, I want to give a huge thank you to Ben Rothenberg, whose stuff you can find at the New York Times for Racket Magazine. And of course, you can go follow his podcast, the No Challenges Remaining podcast, on wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's always a pleasure when we get to chat with him. And this was a really exciting match. Certainly, as he said, one of the inflection points in recent tennis history, one of the most impactful matches of 21st century tennis. So we're glad we got to explore that all. The reason we are able to do these podcasts, of course, due to our friends at Midwest Sports. And if you don't remember, go to MidwestSports.com. Use our promo code CR15. You'll get 15% off your order if that order exceeds $75. You also get free shipping. So, it's your one-stop shop for all of your tennis needs. Get all of your shopping all of the way. Get some discounts on that as well. Go to MidwestSports.com. Please go support them. It would mean the world to us. And again, we are so grateful for their continued support of this podcast. And man, I am always grateful. Our super producer, Daniel Westhoff, who does a fuck of an editing job as always, putting these podcasts, putting these videos together. So shout out to him. It is much appreciated. But that'll do it for this edition of CR Classics. If you've missed any of our Cracked Racquets content, be sure to go to our website, crackedrackets.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's 3 clicks, folks. You can get that out of the way. You never have to worry about me asking it again. But we sincerely appreciate you all taking the time to watch, and we hope you enjoyed our latest edition of CR Classics.